While playable characters in a fighting game are pretty much the most important thing, part of what makes a world feel full are a bunch of background characters. Whether they're hanging out on the stages or just people to talk to in the story, having these characters around is great for the lore and just fun to point out designs at. So when fighting game developers want to expand a roster, some of the best places to turn to are the backgrounds of the lore. I want to go over some of the non-playable characters, aka NPCs, in fighting games that eventually joined a roster. These characters can come anywhere from within the games, stages, arcade endings, story modes, other character intros and outros. As long as I can say they started their fighting game stint not on a roster, it's fair game. And that includes licensed fighting games where established characters elsewhere were in the background first. Now, let's notice the top 10 fighting game NPCs that became playable. Number 10, Anita from Darkstalkers in Marvel Superheroes. This one almost feels like a cheat to put on the list, since Anita was just a test character who was never meant to be in this game, but she was intentionally left accessible in the Japanese version of Marvel Superheroes using a special input, which we can all now get internationally in the Marvel vs. Capcom collection, so no hacking is needed, and I would say she's valid for this topic. Anita is an NPC from Darkstalkers who follows around one of the protagonists, Donovan, during any match that he's in. She was an orphan who was also an outcast due to her mysterious psychic powers, and Donovan was an outcast due to being part vampire, so he took her in to both help her control her powers and because he was a nice guy who understood her struggle. Since he's the only person she can trust and because he's her legal guardian, Anita is in the background running along as Donovan moves on the stage and rushing to his attention when he loses. In Donovan's arcade mode endings, it shows older Anita out in the world in control of her powers and possibly the only one who can stop Donovan if he ever gives in to the vampire side of his persona, so now she has the potential to be a good fighter. However, they just mostly go the joke character route when she's playable, but in a way that still fits. As mentioned in Marvel Superheroes, Anita was there as a test character initially that made it into release because, why not? The series eventually became Marvel vs. Capcom, so let's get a head start with Anita and Akuma being playable in X-Men Children of the Atom. She's a diet version of Donovan, having a mini version of his sword that she can plant into the ground and throw like a boomerang. She also has his fire upswing, which involves her summoning Akuma from Street Fighter, and his forward lightning, which involves summoning Mei Ling, being another NPC from Darkstalkers who helps her sister Shenko in that game to fight as a uniform character. And throughout all this, Anita is controlling these with her psychic powers, fitting with the lore. It made for the simple animations you would need for a character they put no time into developing. The super plays with the wackiness too, where her headless doll sprouts about 100 heads to barrage the opponent. I know when fans wanted playable Anita, they were more thinking of the honed power Anita that was teased rather than a joke, and I wanted that too, but they were kinda just doing whatever they wanted in these games. Anita was never playable again after this, though she was an assist in the first Marvel vs. Capcom where she threw a bunch of random crap at the opponent. For a serious playable Anita, if we ever enter a realm where a new Darkstalkers game exists, older Anita feels like a no-brainer for the roster, but for now, I'll be happy enough with this silly appearance. Number 9, Martian Manhunter in Injustice. A big thing about the set pieces in Injustice, the DC Comics fighting game series, is there are DC Comics characters all over the stages that aren't on the roster, especially in the first game. In the Watchtower downstairs, you have Mr. Terrific watching over some sun device. Stryker's Island has the Superman villain's parasite being contained, and you can throw Metallo. The Arkham Asylum stages just import the Batman villains from the Arkham video game series. Kilowog is in Metropolis, and if you look to the Hall of Justice, there's Giganta and the Atom having a giant slugfest in the background with the sounds of them punching looping on the windscreen. But the most notable background character to me is back to the Watchtower, John Jones, aka Martian Manhunter, a prolific member of the Justice League who is pretty much the only notable member left off the original roster of the first game. Obviously, there are different iterations of the Justice League, so he's not the only missing member, but as someone who learned about the Justice League through the 2001 cartoon and watched every second of that, I was surprised they did not reunite that version of the Justice League in this game for the sake of nostalgia, since they brought back as many voice actors from the cartoon as they could for this game.
Quite a mismatch. I'll go easy on you.
Here, Martian Manhunter just flew around the area watching the fight to acknowledge that he exists. My friends and I had a running gag where whenever we played on this stage, Jean would passive-aggressively comment on the match like, "Hey, I'm here. You know what would be cool? If I could fight. I have laser eyes. Those would be fun to play." But after months of us joking, he was announced as extra DLC after the first DLC pass was complete. Whether he was planned from the beginning or not, it was that exact character model from the background, but he had his voice from the cartoon, and he was good. Like really good. Best in the game. He had excellent zoning with his telepathy and balls of telepathy stuff, long combos, a teleport, and he could stretch his limbs for more range. So we were right when we thought he would be cool to play, and they might have been right when they put him in the background since he was overpowered. And as expected, if you play on the Watchtower stage with him, he's no longer in the background. Some of the other background cameos in this game ended up in the second game, mainly Grodd, Poison Ivy who was in her cell in the first game, Atrocitus who was fighting Kilowog in Metropolis, and the Atom, with it being the successor to the mantle, Ryan Choi, rather than the original Atom, Ray Palmer, who was in the background of this game. But still, Martian Manhunter was the first Injustice character to go from background to foreground, and it was well deserved considering his legacy. Number 8. Kuroko from Samurai Showdown. Kuroko is the referee in the Samurai Showdown games, starting in the first one. It's a standard background role of them moving along with the fighters holding a flag in each hand, ready to motion when a player is hit and eventually throw confetti for the winner. It gives the stages some realistic flair as if this is a real life match going on that doesn't have health bars to indicate how the fight is really going. But as far as the game's concerned, Kuroko seems like a faceless background character, literally. He's there as an accessory to the field who will never interact with the match, and he's completely covered in black, not even showing his face since his identity is not important. Kuroko translates to Child of Darkness, as in someone who operates unseen from the shadows, so we're not meant to perceive him, he's like a stagehand in a play. So, as a big surprise, Kuroko was a secret opponent in Samurai Showdown 2. There were special conditions to unlock him that involve winning with a super with less than 20 seconds on the clock on the arcade ladder, but it was very hard to do consistently, and he wasn't actually playable here, he was just an opponent. Where I first learned about Kuroko in Versus mode was in Samurai Showdown 6, when they were trying to have every character conceivable on the roster. Since Kuroko was an opponent in the past, he made the roster, and I was like, wow, they're just really letting anyone in here. The original part of his moveset is hitting you with his flags, which is like, yeah, he has those, makes sense. But the rest of his moveset just references Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, and King of Fighters characters. His kick? It's Rugal Bernstein's or Krauser's depending on which one you're feeling. The ground projectile? That's just Terry Bogard's Power Wave. Ball projectile? Athena. Close-up projectile? The Toto family. Even his super moves just belong to Kyo and Iori. In some of the other games, Kuroko used to be able to transform into other Samurai Showdown opponents, so maybe this is a reference to him potentially being able to use any character's moves. And despite these moves being mostly copies, you don't see these attacks on the same characters ever, whether we're talking about Samurai Showdown or their games of origin, so unintentionally, by being unoriginal, he's kinda very original. Number 7. Colleen from Street Fighter. Colleen becoming a playable character was always pretty cool to me. When I was younger, I thought it was intriguing on its own that Gil had a pretty typically dressed assistant in his cult that was otherwise mystical looking. I liked the pushed up part of her hair the most, like she could go to a business office and fit right in. Gil, on the other hand, would be banned for not wearing pants. Despite me liking her design though, she didn't do anything in Street Fighter 3 outside of take Gil's stuff in his Versus intro, and appear in Dudley's arcade mode ending where she's talking tough all of a sudden. Gil straight up says, "No, I lost, give him his car back," and Colleen's like, "Yeah, you better leave, Dudley, before my master changes his mind." And Gil is probably thinking, "What are you doing? I just said I lost fairly." That being said, she just felt like the typical Street Fighter 3 side character, like the other characters in the intros or win poses or in the arcade mode endings. She was there for the flavor, but she wasn't a prominent character that people wanted playable, though I did make a joke about putting her in Street Fighter V in an early 2015 video, so I guess I was ahead of the curve. However, Street Fighter V knocked our socks off to show us that she could throw hands as much as she could do whatever she was doing before. Gil bestowed ice powers upon her, so now she can skate, freeze, and make a bit of hail fall, along with infusing ice into her physical hits. On my Cryomancers in fighting games list, I only put her as an honorable mention, and I legit don't know what I was thinking. She has top 5 potential. In fact, even without the ice, she's an impressive fighter, using the Russian-style Sistema, which has a bit of grappling, a bit of quick strikes, and a heavy hit or two. My favorite maneuver is when she strikes her hand in rapid succession like a blade. She was also a star of the story mode in that game, putting together a coalition for Gil to resist Shadaloo so Gil's Illuminati would go uninterfered. So besides the fighting skills, she also had a silver tongue. Also in the story mode, this was before she was announced as DLC, so she was actually an NPC twice, even getting her face redone when she was officially put on the roster. She was wearing what would become her default outfit in the story, being a heavy coat and hat, which felt counterintuitive since her legs were exposed, but I'll assume the cryokinesis prevents her from feeling the cold and the coat is just there for aesthetic. The Street Fighter 3 look was still there as a classic outfit, and her classic hair was retained in some of her other costumes too. The new hair is nice, but when it comes to Colleen, I say you always gotta have that pushed up hairstyle.
What's this? This is your ultimate. I feel so. You lose. You must have miscalculated.
Number 6. Blaze from Mortal Kombat. The original Mortal Kombat trilogy always had a lot of things hidden in the background, many of which were reused assets to make the most out of what they had. In the pit stage in Mortal Kombat 2, to make the tournament seem bigger, there's another fight on the elevation in the distance. And by fight, I mean the fighters are standing there in their idle pose since there were graphical limitations, but I get what they were doing. The two characters just reused Liu Kang, but recolored, one getting a green shade on his outfit named Hornbuckle, and the other one getting covered in fire, who fans named Torch, but they were afraid Marvel would send a cease and desist with that name and aesthetic, so they eventually named him Blaze. Anyway, this seemingly throwaway background character turned into something much bigger, since when Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance came out, Blaze was a secret character to unlock. He was pretty generic, both in terms of moveset, reusing many animations from other characters, and design, being a bare-bones human model, but just red and a flame. However, they were implying he was going to be around for more than just an Easter egg from the past. After appearing one more time in the PSP version of the next game, Mortal Kombat Deception, it was revealed Blaze was gaining power to become the final boss of the game following that, Mortal Kombat Armageddon. I've spoken about the plot of that game in a couple of other videos, but I've only mentioned Blaze in passing since he wasn't the focus of the entry in those videos. When the universe was at risk of being destroyed by all the tension between the fighters, he was put there to take watch and emerge when the Armageddon event was going to occur. The realm's protectors meant for him to be a goal for the fighters to reach, to hopefully beat, get his powers, and then alleviate the fighting or kill off people that needed to be killed off.
Now face me in Mortal Kombat!
Preferably, their son is the one who gets to Blaze for the best ending, but he's not important here. What I like about Boss Blaze is he has this hulking design that sort of represents his stature from Mortal Kombat 2, and he's a pretty cool boss design overall, but for personality and moveset, he's pretty boring. He rolls at you and he has a fire teleport, not my ideal Mortal Kombat boss. He's just like, hey, you gotta beat me, I'm angry and on fire, my blood is orange. That being said, the orange blood is pretty neat. Not sure what inspired them to develop the guy on fire who was doing nothing and make him so vital to the end of the story, but I do think it's cool how they took even the most minuscule parts of the lore to get some of their biggest ideas. That being said, I won't shed a tear if Blaze stays firmly in the old timeline. Number 5, Big Band from Skullgirls. Skullgirls is 100% my aesthetic. I love how the characters look and move, and naturally, I think the backgrounds look amazing, with a portion of the stages being filled with random characters, including fan-made designs from their crowdfunding rewards. So characters on the casino stage are just outside OCs. But if you ever wanted to see Matt McMuscles and Wooly in a fighting game, this is the one. But for the rest of the stages, they're either incidentals from the series or characters in the lore. Since Skullgirls was still a small fighting game, many of these characters were planned or at least had concepts, but couldn't be funded, so being on a stage was their consolation prize. And the stage at hand for this entry is Lab 8, where the scientist Dr. Avian has his experiments and assistants watching the fight. For the experiments, these are people he saved with his eccentric tech: Leduc the electric guy, Hive the bee woman, Ilium the woman made of intestines, also Stanley the shark scientist. But the biggest of these background characters was the musical instrument cyborg Big Band, designed with the same background art style as everyone else. We mainly knew at the time of the game's release that he was the father figure of all the younger members of Lab 8, and maybe he would be cool to play. Well, once the game got funding to develop DLC, Big Band was the second character added and the first male fighter. I discussed him on my Giant Characters in Fighting Games list, where I spoke about how he scrapes the ceiling with his height. All of his tech are different musical instruments, a little percussion, some brass, the mighty woodwind. Also, I said some brass, but it's actually a lot of brass, since they go for the brass knuckles pun with his sliding fist attack. Being a big body, there is some heavy armor on these attacks, making him hard to hit out of his moves. My favorite attacks are the big ones that leave the opponent in a bit of stun and leave their ears ringing, like he hits this bell so hard it cracks, those cymbals have a nice sound wave to them, and don't think you're safe full screen when he has his giant step around. Why Dr. Avian made a cyborg out of a giant saxophone with the rest of the orchestra in the mix and not just regular robot parts is beyond me, but it made this former background character one of the hardest guys to ever hit, or making this guy's the hardest hits to ever just play the JoJo's reference attack.
The world is full of obvious things.
Number 4, Dr. Beskanovic from Tekken. Dr. Beskanovic was a recurring character throughout Tekken who was usually kidnapped and forced to work with the villains early on, since he's a feeble old man who didn't want to get killed. He tended to get paired up with Yoshimitsu, since the doctor made Yoshimitsu his cybernetic arm, and in return, Yoshimitsu rescued him from Kazuya. Then they worked together behind the scenes, since they were buddies now, usually with Yoshimitsu entering the tournaments to get the doctor what he needed, like the Blood of Ogre, the final boss of Tekken 3, or just refitting Yoshimitsu with new tech. And after modeling the doctor for a few games in arcade mode endings, they thought, hey, why not use these assets on a character model? In Tekken 3, he reused moves from other fighters, but they all came together in a way that felt completely original. One wildcard factor is he fell down a lot and had explosions in his pocket because, is that a bomb in your pocket, or are you just happy to see, oh, it really is a bomb? He was brought back in Tekken Tag Tournament 2, which brought in every character from the game's history, and he was a bit more refined. He now had a mad pain stance to control when he falls down, and used that as a way to catch his opponent off guard, usually with a random kick or explosion. And he's a tumbler, being oddly limber for a man of his age. My favorite new move, though, is his static electricity charge, since he's a scientist, so of course he would find scientific ways to make up for his lack of skills. He's almost giddy the way he runs at his opponent with his attack. He's not a mad scientist, but he definitely has potential to be one. He mainly loves working on robots, creating some of the Jack models, and his magnum opus, Elisa, who's a robot fighter with chainsaws modeled after his late daughter. It's actually a very sweet story, but why'd you put chainsaws in her? This is still hand-to-hand combat. Another note for the fighting is they kinda make it realistic of an old man with no fighting prowess, since he has horrible range and damage. The extra skills and stances do help out with the damage struggles, but he's definitely a character you want to play for the fun and not competitively.
You win.
Number 3, Asuka from Guilty Gear. Whenever I talk about Guilty Gear lore in detail, I tend to have to bring up a figure called That Man, since he was responsible for so many established parts of the series. He allegedly created the biological weapons of war known as gears, as heard in the title. He started the whole Crusades war in the lore, and he was the target for the main character Soul Bad Guy as revenge for using him for such conflicts. That Man also had multiple servants who were playable, including Raven, a man who likes pain, Jacko, who's adorable, and most notably, Ino, the former final boss, so That Man vicariously got to be a final boss through her. He was already the lead villain, so you might as well give him some credit there too. Whenever That Man was referenced originally, his face was completely in shadow and his hood was up, to emphasize that he was a mysterious being that we weren't supposed to know. By the time we got to the end of the Guilty Gear XR games though, That Man was de-hooded, and we learned he kinda just looked like a guy, and his name was Asuka. It's not like he was boring, but I expected something more, maybe more supernatural or decrepit. And for such a prolific villain, it felt like a big deal when he made his first playable appearance in Guilty Gear Strive as DLC. Well, technically, it was an exact clone of Asuka with the same thoughts, feelings, and voice as him, which basically meant it was him, but in a lore-friendly way not to mess up the story. They made him as final boss-like as possible if you master him, since he has so many powers and can alter all of his fighting styles with different spells. There are way too many spells to keep track of, and this is not an Asuka guide, so I'll just say he throws a lot of cubes, like an insane amount if you roll good with his spells. He has the tools to be a broken final boss, but they reel him in by making you have to maintain different spells and adding a random factor to some of the spells. Regardless, the animations on him forming the cubes looks amazing, especially when he makes a fist out of them. No matter your opinions on Asuka, he at least shows us that we need more cubes in fighting games.
それ以前に基礎体力が桁違いに低いんだ。人に勝つというのは難しいな。消滅させる方がよほど簡単だ。
Number 2, Kokinoe from BlazBlue. With BlazBlue NPCs, it feels like if you saw anyone in the story mode in the early games, they were eventually going to be playable, and an early NPC that caught my eye was the scientist Kokinoe. When she was just an NPC, it made sense to me why she wasn't playable. She was the one doing all the science involving some of the other fighters, so it felt like she was involved with the battlefield without actually being on the battlefield. She created the Lambda 11 unit. The villain Relius had her work on his Nirvana unit before he revealed he was like super evil, and her crowning achievement was rebuilding an injured soldier into a cyborg known as Iron Tiger. She fought vicariously through him in a few games, sending him on odd jobs, and he obliged because he owed his life to her. Kokinoe wasn't trying to take over the world or anything, so it's not like he was strictly opposed to it. She was a bit of a mad scientist, but not in an evil way, more just wanting to increase the unnecessary tech on him to push the boundaries. So with all that involvement, I was content just hearing her through communication devices. However, after a few games, BlazBlue Chrono Phantasm put her on the roster as DLC, making her a permanent roster member in all future games. And seeing her playable, I completely 180'd and was like, why wasn't she here sooner? Being the tech lady, she fights with all sorts of gadgets to make up for her lack of power or traditional fighting skills. Her tool of choice is the drill rocket, which she keeps concealed in her sleeves, and those things make for some heavy hits that send the opponent flying. For a less advanced weapon, she has a giant wrench, which essentially acts as her sword. She also has a grappling hook, freeze ray, and my favorite, the motorized baseball bat. That would hurt if you got hit by a regular one, but with the extraordinary beings in this game, she needs some extra force. Her movement is also neat, since it shows she can keep up with the trained fighters using some artificial speed. She has a teleporter, scooter for dashing, and she can just bring the opponent to her with her gravitational orbs. Who needs walking? And of course, laser beams are in there. It goes to show that her not fighting all these years was not from being incapable of it, she was just saving us from the madness of her weapons.
テイガー、応答しろテイガー。通じんか。
Now, I didn't say one character per series of origin in the intro, but it was working out that way. However, I had to double dip into Street Fighter 3 for this list, and that might have given you a strong hint on who this is going to be, but this character had multiple stints as an NPC, which landed her at number 1, Poison from Street Fighter. We need to start with the beat-em-up game Final Fight for this history, which takes place in the same universe as Street Fighter in Metro City. The nefarious Mad Gear gang was made up of delinquents who kidnapped the mayor's daughter, and you had to play as the mayor or her boyfriend or local ninja to rescue her. Poison with the pink hair and her palette swap Roxy with the orange hair were enemy types that appeared on stages en route to getting to the bosses, who would do kicks and flips at the player in attempts to knock them out. Since they were common enemies, they were easy to take down, but they were visually appealing with their handcuffs, heels, and short shorts, and that was apparently enough to make an impact, since this would be far from Poison's only appearance. Street Fighter slowly started integrating protagonists and enemies from Final Fight onto the rosters, beginning in Street Fighter Alpha. While Poison was not playable in any of the Street Fighter Alpha games, she did appear on the Metro City stage in Street Fighter Alpha 2, so mark that down as another NPC cameo for her. Though what I'd say is her most famous NPC role is next, in Street Fighter 3's Second Impact. In the first update of Street Fighter 3, the pro wrestler Hugo was added. Similar to Poison, Andore was an enemy type in Final Fight, clearly based on Andre the Giant, and the devs thought he would be a good grappler, so they redesigned him, named him Hugo, changed Andore to his last name, and now we have a beloved grappler who can run. But his moveset isn't the important part here. Poison was brought in with him as his manager in the lore to essentially do the talking for his wrestling deals and be the hype before and after the match for him. She casually walks off screen once she's done in his intro and comes back in for the win pose. I like how they both quit the Mad Gear gang together to do this, and Hugo might be the winner of his arcade modes in the Street Fighter 3 games, but those endings belong to Poison recruiting everyone for their wrestling league, and she continues to do the big talking for them again in Hugo's intros in the SNK vs Capcom crossover, building up her NPC resume more. But after all those years of filling the NPC role, Poison finally became playable not in Street Fighter 4, but in not Street Fighter Cross Tekken, but in Final Fight Revenge, the seldom discussed Final Fight 3D fighting game. It had all the protagonists and enemies from the first game. It's not widely known, but Poison's Kiss Super that flashes sensual images of herself on screen tends to be a highlight for people. And now, finally after all the years of being an NPC and having one sidetrack as a playable character, she had one more NPC appearance in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 on the Metro City stage. But then, finally, 2012, Street Fighter Cross Tekken. Poison was playable in a game with Street Fighter in the title, and it's pretty much what we could have asked for. And this model and playstyle was carried over to her official Street Fighter debut in Ultra Street Fighter 4, so I'll just combine these both as her first appearance. She had her Final Fight kicks, her leg shoryuken, projectiles from her whip, the whip actually being a record chain attack, and she can ride you like a horsey. Also, funny enough, in English in Final Fight Revenge, she was voiced by Lonnie Manila, the voice of Rouge the Bat at the time of that game's release. And in Street Fighter 4, she was voiced by Karen Strassman, the voice of Rouge the Bat at the time of that game's release. So, artists, there's prime fan art material right there. Her story in Street Fighter 4 was an explanation of things we could have assumed taking place before Street Fighter 3, but it was nice, where we learned how Hugo and Poison teamed up and were doing the whole self-established wrestling league thing. And for Poison's return in Street Fighter 5, gameplay-wise, it was partially the same, just with a long whip now rather than a short riding crop, making her more ranged. And story-wise, it was the filleriest of filler, where Poison and Hugo broke up as a team, but they made up by the end of it, which was really just because Hugo wasn't on the roster of this game and they needed to give her something to do, so she went back to Metro City to visit some old friends. Finally, you might wonder, what happened to her palette swap Roxy? Well, she is confirmed to be a completely separate character from Poison, as seen in both Poison's and Abigail's Street Fighter V stories, and no one questions why they look alike. Also, it was a no-brainer idea, but one of Poison's alternate color palettes changes her hair to orange to essentially make her Roxy. So, for going from common enemy to background character to NPC to roster member that people want to see return, Poison is the top fighting game NPC that became playable. Now, what did you think? Were all these NPCs worthy of the big time, or should some of them have kept the non-playable character? And who are some of your favorite eventually playable of the non-playable fighters? Whether I discussed them or not, let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.